Good evening, and welcome. Tonight's story is the great story of the Bharatas, the long tale of a family and a river and a field, told slowly from the beginning all the way to its end. There is nothing here to follow closely. The story will carry itself, and it will still be going on whether or not you are awake to hear it, which is rather the point. If these stories help you rest, subscribing tells me to make more of them. As one telling has it, it began like this. There is a forest called Naimisha, where the sages once gathered to hear a story told slowly. And it is there that this telling begins. It was late in the year and late in the night, and the fires had burned down to the red stage, where they give more warmth than light. And the men seated around them had the settled look of people who have nowhere else to be before morning. They had come for a long telling. They had brought nothing with them but their patience. And into that clearing there came a bard who had carried a story a great distance, over roads and through other people's countries, the way a man carries water without spilling it. He sat down among them. He was given something to eat, and he ate it slowly, and nobody hurried him, because it was understood among such people that a story that has traveled a long way should be allowed to arrive before it is asked to speak. When he was ready, he told them that the story he had was the story of the Bharatas, and that it was very long, and that it had in it a river and a vow, and a game played with dice, and a field where a great many things ended. He told them it would take all night, and perhaps more than one night, and that they should not worry about the parts they missed, because the story came round again, as such stories do. Then he began. Far to the north and west of that forest, he said, there is a river, and on the bank of the river there is a city called Hastinapura, which is to say, the city of the elephant. It is an old city, even in this story. Kings had risen there, and been buried there, and been half forgotten there, for longer than anyone could count. And the river had gone past all of them without particularly noticing, in the wide, unhurried, silver way that rivers have. And the city had grown up along it the way moss grows along a stone. There was a king in that city named Shantanu, who was a good king in the ordinary sense of the word, which is to say that the granaries were full and the roads were safe, and nobody thought about him very much. He was fond of hunting, and fonder still of walking, and most of all he liked to walk beside the water in the early part of the evening, when the day's heat had gone out of the stones, and the light on the river had turned the color of beaten metal. He walked there alone. It was the 1 hour of his day in which he was nobody in particular. And it was on one of those evenings that he saw a woman standing in the shallows. She was there, the way the river was there, without explanation, as though she had always been standing in that particular place, and he had simply not looked before. The water moved around her ankles and did not seem to trouble her. When she turned and looked at him, Shantanu forgot what he had been thinking about on the way down, and never afterwards remembered it. He asked her to marry him, which was quick of him, and she said yes, which was quicker. But she set one condition on it. He was never to ask her why she did anything. He was never to check her, never to stop her, never to say to her, "What are you doing?" On the day he did, she would go, and she would not come back. And Shantanu, who was in love, and who had never in his life been refused anything, agreed at once, and thought nothing of it, as men in stories always do. So she came up out of the water, and went with him to the city, and they were married. And for a while there was nothing in the world but happiness. Then the first child was born, and she carried it down to the river and gave it to the water. Now the bard told the sages in the clearing, "This is the hard place in the story, and it comes early, and it is best to go through it the way one goes through cold water, steadily and without stopping." Shantanu watched her do it and said nothing, because he had promised. He watched her come back up the bank with her arms empty. He watched her sit down and take up whatever she had been doing before, calmly, as though the evening had not changed. And he kept his word, and the keeping of it cost him more than anything he had ever paid for anything. It happened 7 times, 7 children born, and 7 times that walk down to the water, and each time the river took them in the wide, patient, silver way that rivers have, and closed over them without any mark at all, and went on toward the sea, as if nothing whatever had been put into it. The city did not know. The court did not know. The king lay awake at night with his promise sitting on his chest like a stone, and said nothing, and grew old faster than he should have. The city did not know. The court did not know. The king lay awake at night with his promise sitting on his chest like a stone, and said nothing, and grew old faster than he should have. And when the 8th was born, and she rose and took it up and turned toward the door, Shantanu found that he had come to the end of what a man can hold. He went after her. He caught her arm on the bank in the last of the light, and he asked her what she was doing, and who she was, and what kind of creature could do such a thing 8 times. She stopped. She looked at him with something in her face that was not anger. And it was then that he understood that she had been waiting for this, and had known the shape of it from the beginning, and had loved him anyway. She told him that she was Ganga, the river herself, and that the children she had carried down had not been drowned, but released, because each of them had been under an old obligation to be born once into the world and be gone again quickly, and she had spared them the length of it. She told him that this 8th one was the last, and was different, and would stay. But because Shantanu had spoken, she could not stay with him to raise the boy. She would take him away and bring him up herself, in places the king had no road to, and when he was grown, she would give him back. And then she went into the water with the child, and the surface closed, and Shantanu was left standing on the bank, with the evening going on around him exactly as it had before. The years that came after were long and were not interesting, which is often the way with the years that come after. Shantanu ruled. The granaries stayed full. He walked by the river in the evenings and looked at it, and it looked back at him the way water does, which is to say, not at all, and he got no comfort from it, and went down anyway every evening for a very long time. Then, one evening, far downstream, he found the river running low and strange, half its water gone somewhere. And when he walked up along the bank to see why, he came upon a young man standing in the shallows with a bow, who had shot arrows into the riverbed so thickly that he had dammed the current with them. The young man had the look of someone doing something difficult for the pleasure of doing it well. Shantanu stood and watched him, and felt the strangest thing in the world begin to happen in his chest. And then Ganga was there beside him, as she had been the first time, standing in the water without being troubled by it. And she said, "This is your son, and mine, and he has learned everything I could think of to teach him, and now he is yours." The young man's name was Devavrata. He came up the bank and knelt, and Shantanu put his hands on his shoulders, and neither of them said anything for a while that was worth writing down. So the king went home to Hastinapura with a grown son walking beside him, and the city came out to look, and there was rejoicing of the proper public kind. And Shantanu was happier in those months than he had been in 30 years. But he was old enough now to know that happiness of that size usually has something standing behind it, and he was right. And what was standing behind it was a girl on a ferry 2 days down river, who had not yet been mentioned to anyone. And the river went on past the city as it had always gone, carrying the lamps of the evening away into the dark, and the story waited. You will remember how the river gave back a son to Shantanu, and how the king was happy, and how his happiness had a shadow in it. The shadow was small at first, and it was 2 days down river, and its name was Satyavati. She was the daughter of a chief of ferrymen, and she worked the crossing herself, poling the flat boat back and forth over the brown water with the unbothered competence of someone who has done a thing since childhood. There was a sweetness in the air around her that people noticed from the bank and could never afterwards describe. And there was a story about how she had come by it that the ferryman told, and the story does not need tonight. Shantanu, walking further than usual one evening, came down to that crossing and saw her, and was lost a second time in his life, in the same way, on the same river. He did not act on it. He was an old king by then, and he had learned something from the first time, and he went home and said nothing to anyone. But a man who has stopped eating and stopped sleeping and stopped caring about the harvest is not difficult to read, especially by a son who has been watching him carefully since the day they met. Devavrata went down to the crossing himself and found the ferryman and asked him plainly what the matter was. The ferryman was not a cruel man. He was a father with one daughter and no illusions, and he said what he thought. He said that a king might marry his daughter gladly, and that his daughter might be happy for a season, and that then a son would be born to her, and that son would be nothing, because there was already a grown prince in Hastinapura standing in front of him with a bow in his hand and the whole city behind him. He said he would not sell his daughter into that. He said the only terms he had were that Satyavati's son should sit on the throne of Hastinapura after Shantanu, and he knew as he said it that no prince alive would agree to such a thing, and he said it anyway, because it was the truth of what he wanted. And Devavrata said, very slow, soft, low, and even, with unhurried pauses at the end of every sentence. Keep the energy calm and soothing throughout. Read only the provided text. Do not add or improvise any extra words. And Devavrata said, very simply, that he agreed. He said that he renounced the throne then and there, on the river bank, that Satyavati's son would rule, that he himself would serve that son and never contest it, and that this was settled and did not need discussing. The ferryman looked at him for a while, and then said the other thing, the thing he had not meant to have to say. He said, and your sons? Because a man may give up a throne and mean it, and his children may take it up again in 40 years and mean that too. And where would my grandson be then? There was a pause on the river bank at that point, and the story usually lets it be a long one. Then Devavrata said that he would not marry, that there would be no sons, that the line stopped with him by his own choice, and he made it a vow out loud, standing in the mud of a ferry crossing with nobody important listening. and it is said that the sky made some acknowledgment of it, and that flowers fell, though the ferryman probably only heard a young man's voice going quiet at the end of a sentence. And from that evening he was not called Devavrata anymore. He was called Bhishma, which means the terrible one, not because he was frightening, but because the thing he had just done was. He brought Satyavati back to Hastinapura himself, poling the boat, which is a detail the story keeps because it is the kind of thing that actually happens. And Shantanu, when he understood what his son had paid for his father's evening walk, was so undone by it that he gave him the only gift he had left that was worth anything. He told him that death would not take him until he was willing, and that he would go in his own hour and not before. It was meant kindly. It would keep an old man lying on a field for a very long time, in a chapter that is a great many hours from here, and neither of them could have known that, and it is best not to think about it yet. So Shantanu married Satyavati, and had 2 sons by her, and died, as kings do, and the sons were children, and Bhishma governed the kingdom on their behalf and did not take it. The elder son, Chitrangada, was a hot and forward young man who went out to fight somebody over nothing much and did not come back, and the story gives him 3 lines and moves on, which is what the story thinks of that kind of death. The younger, Vichitravirya, was gentle and not strong, and when he came of age, Bhishma went out to find him a wife, because that was the sort of thing Bhishma did now, everyone else's arrangements, competently for another 40 years. There was a bride choosing at the kingdom of Kashi, and Bhishma went to it and carried off all 3 of the princesses at once, in the old manner, against a hall full of suitors, and brought them home. 2 of them, Ambika and Ambalika, married Vichitravirya. The eldest, Amba, told Bhishma on the road that her heart was already promised elsewhere, and he let her go at once, and she went, and she was not received where she went, and she came back, and asked Bhishma to marry her himself. And he could not, because of a vow he had made in the mud at a ferry crossing when he was young, about sons he was never going to have, for the sake of a stranger's happiness. He told her so. She did not accept it, and her not accepting it went on burning for a very long time in a very quiet way. And it will come back, and when it does, it will not look like this. The story sets it down gently now, so that it does not have to be explained later. Then Vichitravirya died too, still young, without children, and the line of Bharata had come to an end in the space of about 10 years. Satyavati, who was by now a woman of considerable practicality, sat in the palace and thought about it. She asked Bhishma to take the throne and marry and continue the family, and he refused kindly, and she knew before she asked that he would. So she went further back, into her own life before the palace, and called on a son she had borne long before any of this, on an island in the river, to a wandering sage. His name was Vyasa. He was the arranger. He is the one who set this whole story down, who is in it and outside it at the same time, the way a man telling a story by a fire is inside his own clearing and outside the tale he is telling. He came when his mother called him, out of the forest, unwashed and matted and smelling of wood smoke and long solitude, and he did what was asked of him, which was to give the dead line children. 3 were born from that. The first was born to Ambika, who had closed her eyes when Vyasa came to her, and so the child was born blind, Dhritarashtra, who would be king in name and never in the way that mattered. The second was born to Ambalika, who had gone pale when Vyasa came to her, and so the child was born pale, Pandu, who would be king in fact, and would not keep it long. The third was born to a servant woman, who had not been afraid at all, and had received him plainly and without pretense. And so that child was born whole and clear and wise, and his name was Vidura, and he was the only person in the whole of Hastinapura who reliably said what was true out loud for the next 70 years. He was also, being a servant's son, never going to be king, and the story lets you notice that yourself. So there were 3 boys again in the palace, and a grandmother who had arranged it, and an uncle who had renounced everything, and now had 3 more children to raise. Bhishma taught them, and had them taught, and married them off in time, and ran the kingdom while they grew, and never once mentioned that any of it had cost him anything. And the palace slept, as palaces do, with its lamps guttering one by one along the corridors, and no one yet knew which of the 3 children would matter most. You will remember the 3 brothers of Hastinapura, the blind one, the pale one, and the wise one, and how the kingdom came to rest on them. The blind one, Dhritarashtra, was married to a princess of Gandhara named Gandhari, who came from the dry country in the northwest, and who did a thing on the day of her wedding that people argued about for the rest of her life. When she learned that the husband chosen for her could not see, she took a length of cloth and bound it over her own eyes, and did not take it off again, not for her wedding, not for her sons, not for anything, for the whole of the rest of the story. Some said afterwards that it was a reproach. It was not. It was a young woman deciding, on a morning when nobody had asked her opinion about anything, that she would not take for herself a thing her husband could not have. She kept it for 60 years, and she is in this story to the very end, walking through it with her eyes bound, and she sees more of it than most of the people with eyes. In time, she bore 100 sons, which the story states plainly and does not explain. And the eldest of them was named Duryodhana, which means hard to conquer. And he was, and it was not a kindness to name a child that. The pale one, Pandu, was married to 2 women. The first was Kunti, a king's daughter raised in another king's house, and she had a thing in her past that nobody knew about. As a girl, she had been given the care of a difficult and famous sage who was visiting, and she had looked after him faultlessly for a year, never once letting her patience show. And at the end of it, he had given her a mantra as a reward, a set of words by which she could call any of the shining ones and be given a son. It was an extravagant gift to hand a girl of 13, and he probably knew it. She tried it once, not out of desire and not out of ambition, but because she was young and alone in a room in the afternoon, and she wanted to know whether it was true. And it was true. And a child was born to her with earrings already in his ears and armor already on his body, golden and warm and entirely impossible to explain to her family. So she did what a frightened girl does. She put him in a basket and sealed it with wax and carried it down to the river at first light and let it go. He was found. He was raised kindly by a charioteer and his wife far away, and he grew up believing he was a charioteer's son, and his name was Karna. Now, the story knows this, and you know it, and almost nobody inside the story will know it for a very long time. Keep it. It sits underneath everything from here on, like a stone under water. Pandu's second wife was Madri, and Pandu himself made a mistake in a forest early on. He shot at what he took to be a pair of deer, and it was not. It was a sage and his wife. And the dying man laid on him a curse, that he would die himself in the moment he ever again lay with a woman. So Pandu gave up the throne to his blind brother, and went to live in the mountains as an ascetic, with both his wives, in a quiet that must have been very heavy. And it was there that Kunti told him about the mantra, and it was there that it was used properly at last. Yudhishthira was born first, of the Lord of Dharma, and he was the eldest, and he could not lie. And this would turn out to be both the best and the most expensive thing about him. Then Bhima, of the wind, who came out enormous and stayed that way. Then Arjuna, of the king of the shining ones, who would be the finest archer anyone had seen. and Kunti taught the words to Madri, who used them once and had twins, Nakula and Sahadeva, one beautiful and one wise, and both of them habitually overlooked, including, it must be said, by this story. Very slow, soft, low, and even, with unhurried pauses at the end of every sentence. Keep the energy calm and soothing throughout. Then one spring, in the mountains, Pandu forgot himself for a moment with Madri, and the curse did what curses do. And Madri, who believed it had been her doing, would not come back down the mountain. Kunti took the 5 boys and went home to Hastinapura, and walked in through the gate with them, a widow with 5 sons, into a palace that already contained 100. So there were 105 boys in one courtyard, and if you have ever seen even 6 children in a yard, you know how that went. They were taught together. Bhishma saw to it. They were fed together and made to sit together, and in the fullness of time handed over together to a teacher named Drona, who came to the city poor and was given the training of all of them at once, and who became the teacher of both houses, which is a phrase worth holding on to, because in a great many hours' time it is going to hurt. Drona taught them for years, and the years went by the way training years do, in seasons and repetitions. And there is one afternoon out of all of them that the story keeps. Drona hung a wooden bird in a tree, and called the boys up one at a time, and asked each of them what he could see. One saw the tree. One saw the branch and the leaves and the sky behind. One saw his brothers and the garden and the bird. And when Arjuna came up and was asked, he said that he could see the eye of the bird. And Drona asked him what else, and he said, nothing else. And that was the answer. There was also a boy from the forest peoples named Ekalavya who was not allowed to be taught, and who taught himself in front of a clay image of Drona until he was better than any of them, and what was asked of him afterwards was more than should ever be asked of anybody. The story tells it in a few lines and does not defend it. It is one of the places where the epic is simply ashamed of itself, and lets you see that it is. At last there was a tournament to show the city what its princes had learned. The ground was raised, and the awnings went up, and the whole of Hastinapura came out. Bhima and Duryodhana fought with clubs and had to be separated, because there was already something between them that was not sport. And then Arjuna came out and did everything that could be done with a bow, one thing after another, until the crowd stopped being able to tell the difference between skill and weather, and the day was effectively over. And then a young man walked in at the edge of the ground in golden armor, whom nobody knew, and asked to be allowed to do the same things, and did them. The ground went quiet. The two of them stood looking at each other with the enormous, wordless recognition of two people who are the best at the same thing. And then someone asked the stranger who his father was, because a prince could only be matched by a prince. And he could not answer, because he did not know. And he stood there in front of the entire city with nothing to say. And Duryodhana stood up and said that if the only difficulty was that this man was not a king, then he would make him one, and gave him a kingdom on the spot, that afternoon, in front of everybody. It was the most generous thing anyone did in the whole story, and it was done for the worst of reasons, and it bought Duryodhana the one friend who would stand by him at the very end when everything else was gone. Karna never forgot it. He was the giver, the one who could not refuse a request from anybody. And the one thing he was ever given, he paid back with his life. And when the crowds had gone, and the ground was empty, the evening came down over Hastinapura as it always did, indifferent and kind. And the boys slept. You will remember the stranger at the tournament, and the kingdom given to him in an afternoon, and how Duryodhana had begun to count what was his. It is worth being fair to Duryodhana here, because the story is, and because a story in which the man who causes everything is simply wicked is not worth 4 hours of anybody's night. Consider it from where he stood. His father was the king. He was his father's eldest son. He had been born in the palace and raised in the palace, and had never once imagined that the palace would go to anybody else. And then his uncle Pandu's 5 sons had come down out of the mountains with their widowed mother, and had been taken in, and had been fed at the same table. And one of them was stronger than any of his 100 brothers, and another was better with a bow than anyone in the world. And the eldest of them, Yudhishthira, was so transparently and tiresomely good that the city had started saying his name in the tone people use for kings. Duryodhana was not imagining the danger. That is the thing. He was watching a throne he had been promised his whole life drift quietly toward 5 cousins who had done nothing wrong at all. And he had no idea what to do about it, except the thing he did. And his father could refuse him nothing. That was the other half of it. Dhritarashtra had been passed over once himself for blindness, and had watched his younger brother be made king in his place, and had never entirely put it down. And when his son came to him wanting things, the old king found that his mouth would not make the word no. Vidura told him plainly what would come of that, several times, in that flat and unwelcome way he had. It made no difference. It never did. So there was a proposal, made lightly, in the manner of a kindness. The town of Varanavata was holding a festival, and it would be a fine thing if the 5 brothers and their mother went there for the season, to represent the family. A house would be built for them, nothing but the best. And it was built of the best. It was beautiful. It was got up in lacquer and resin and fine dry timber and oils, sweet-smelling, warm to the touch on a cold morning. And every single thing in it, from the beams to the varnish on the walls, had been chosen because it would burn. Vidura came to see them off, and could not say what he knew in front of the people who were standing there, so he said it sideways, in a kind of riddle, about how the creature that digs survives the fire that the creature in the open does not, and about how a man who watches the stars can always find his direction underground. Yudhishthira listened to all of it politely and understood every word. So they went to Varanavata and lived in the beautiful house and admired it publicly, and underneath it, quietly, over a great many nights, a tunnel was dug. It took months. There was nothing dramatic about it. Somebody dug, and somebody carried the earth away in the dark, and somebody sat up and talked cheerfully to the man who had been sent to keep an eye on them, and in this fashion the whole of a season went by. And then, one night, the house burned. Very slow, soft, low, and even, with unhurried pauses at the end of every sentence. Keep the energy calm and soothing throughout. Read only the provided text. Do not add or improvise any extra words. The story does not go inside it. It stands well back, across a field, in the dark, with the dew coming down, and looks at a great orange shape on the horizon, with sparks going up off it into the black, and hears the sound arrive late, the way the sound of a big fire does. The 5 brothers and their mother were a mile away by then, and going further, walking in a line through grass that came up to their waists, not talking. That is all the story says about that night, and it is enough. In the morning the town found the house gone, and bones in the ashes, and word went back to Hastinapura that the sons of Pandu were dead, and there was mourning of the correct public kind, and 1 or 2 people were not entirely surprised, and only Vidura knew. Then came the hiding years, and they are the reason this chapter exists, because after all that the story slows almost to a stop and lets everyone breathe. They walked. They wore what people wear who are not anybody, and they went by tracks rather than roads, and they slept in turns with one of them awake, usually Bhima, who did not seem to need sleep the way the others did. They ate what was going. Kunti, who had been a king's daughter and a king's wife, and would be a king's mother, learned to cook over a fire she had built herself, and by all accounts became rather good at it. They went for months without anybody knowing who they were, and there is a version of this story in which those were the happiest months of their lives, and it is not an unreasonable version. Very slow, soft, low, and even, with unhurried pauses at the end of every sentence. Keep the energy calm and soothing throughout. Read only the provided text. Do not add or improvise any extra words. There was a forest in which Bhima went out at night and met a woman of the forest peoples named Hidimba, whose brother had meant harm and did not manage it. She had come to warn him and stayed to talk. What is worth keeping is what happened after, that Bhima married her and stayed with her a while, with his mother's blessing, and that they had a son called Gatotkacha, who was born quickly, as such children are, and grew quickly, and who told his father before he left that if he was ever needed, he had only to be thought of, and he would come. And then Bhima went back to the road with his brothers, and Hidimba raised the boy in the forest and did not complain about it, and the story treats her with more respect than it treats several queens. At last they came to a town called Ekachakra and stopped there, because they were tired. They took a room in the house of a poor family and lived as Brahmins, going out in the day to ask for alms, coming back at evening and putting what they had been given into one pot and dividing it. Bhima ate half. That was the arrangement, and nobody argued about it, because the arithmetic of Bhima was simply a fact of nature, like weather. Very slow, soft, low, and even, with unhurried pauses at the end of every sentence. Keep the energy calm and soothing throughout. Read only the provided text. Do not add or improvise any extra words. They stayed there a long time, long enough that the room became theirs in the way rooms do. And then one evening a Brahmin came through Ekachakra on his way north, and sat down where such men sit, and talked, and mentioned that the king of Panchala was holding a bride-choosing for his daughter, who had been born out of a fire, and that every king and prince in the world was walking that way, and that there was to be a test with a bow that nobody was expected to pass. Kunti looked at her 5 sons in the lamplight of a borrowed room, and her sons looked back at her, and nobody said anything much. But in the morning they packed what they had, which was almost nothing, and thanked the family, and went north. And they slept that night in a house that was not theirs, in a town that did not know them, and the road to Panchala waited under the stars, in no hurry at all. You will remember the 5 brothers walking toward Panchala in borrowed clothes, with no one knowing their names. Panchala was a rich country, and its capital was full that season, fuller than it had ever been. Kings had come from everywhere with their households and their horses, and the fields outside the city had turned into a second city of tents and awnings and cooking fires, and the price of everything had doubled, and the people of Panchala were delighted. The 5 brothers came in among all that on foot, dusty in the plain cloth of poor Brahmins, and nobody looked at them twice, and they found a corner in a potter's yard and slept there. The reason for all of it was a young woman named Draupadi, the daughter of the king of Panchala, who was called the Fireborn, because she had come into the world out of a sacrificial fire, full-grown, dark and startling, with an air about her of something that had arrived rather than been raised. She was the queen of Panchala in everything but title from the day she appeared. Her brother Drishtadyumna had come out of the same fire, and the 2 of them went about together like a pair of matched horses. Her father had built the test himself, and it was a cruel and beautiful piece of design. High up under the roof of the hall, on a pole, a fish was rigged to turn, slowly, all day. Below it, on the floor, there was a shallow basin of water. And there was a bow, an enormous one, that few men in the hall could bend at all. The suitor had to string the bow, and look only into the water, and put an arrow through the eye of the turning fish above him, seeing it only as a moving shape in the reflection. The kings came up one at a time, all that morning, and one at a time they failed. Some could not string it. Some strung it and could not draw. Some drew and shot and missed, and stood there for a moment with their faces going through several things at once, before they walked back to their seats. The story does not mock any of them. It was an unreasonable test. That was rather the point of it. Then Karna rose. He came down from among the kings in his golden armor, and he took up the bow, and he strung it without any difficulty at all. And the hall changed temperature, because everyone there could see in about 2 seconds that this man was going to do it. And Draupadi, standing at the front, said that she would not have a charioteer's son. The story gives that its one sentence and no more, because it is one of the true wounds in the whole epic, and it does not heal. He set the bow down. He looked up at the fish turning under the roof, and laughed at it once in a way that was not a laugh, and walked out of the hall. And none of the people in that room, not Draupadi, not his friend Duryodhana, not Kunti, who was outside minding a cooking pot, knew what had actually just happened, except that Kunti knew and would go on saying nothing for a very long time yet. After that, the hall settled into the flatness of an occasion that is not going to come off. And in that flatness, a young man in a poor Brahmin's cloth got up from among the Brahmins at the side, where nobody had been paying any attention, and walked out into the middle. There was some noise about it. A hall full of kings does not enjoy being shown a Brahmin at that particular moment. But the rules said what they said, and the king of Panchala, who had built the test, made a small gesture, and it was allowed. Arjuna picked up the bow and looked at it for a moment, the way a man looks at a tool he has been waiting for. He strung it. He walked round and stood over the basin, and he did not look up once, not at the pole, and not at the roof, and not at the fish. He looked into the water, and then he drew and let go, and the arrow went up, and the fish came down. There was that particular silence that lasts about the length of one breath, and then the hall came apart. And Draupadi, who had watched the whole thing from the front, walked out and put the garland round the neck of a man in a poor cloth, whose name she did not know, in front of every king in the world. Very slow, soft, low, and even, with unhurried pauses at the end of every sentence. Keep the energy calm and soothing throughout. Read only the provided text. Do not add or improvise any extra words. They got out of the city that afternoon with some difficulty and a certain amount of shoving, and went back to the potter's yard. And Kunti was inside, and did not look up from what she was doing. And one of the brothers called out through the doorway, in the high spirits of the moment, that they had brought back something wonderful today. And Kunti, without turning round, said what she had said 100 times to 5 boys who were always bringing home fruit or fish or firewood. She said, "Share it among yourselves." And then she turned round. What followed was long and awkward, and was resolved in the way such things were resolved in that age, by a great deal of talking among elders, and by Vyasa arriving from wherever he arrives from, and saying that this had been intended, and by a mother's word being held to be a mother's word. And so Draupadi became the wife of all 5 brothers, by an arrangement that was strange even then, and was argued about even then, and which the story sets down plainly without pretending it is ordinary. As one telling has it, that is how it was. She lived a year at a time in each of their houses, and it is recorded that she was harder to deceive than any of them, and that when she gave an opinion, the room went quiet. The other thing that came out of that afternoon was that the 5 were no longer dead. The king of Panchala had married his daughter to somebody, and that somebody turned out to be the sons of Pandu, alive, with an alliance behind them now that Hastinapura could not simply ignore. So word went south, and there was consternation in one part of the palace and relief in another. And Bhishma and Drona and Vidura all said the same thing, which was that the kingdom should be divided, and half of it given to them. And it was. But the half they were given was the poor half, the wilderness in the west called Khandava, scrub and stone and old forest, with nothing in it and no city at all. They went out there and they built one. That is the part of the story that deserves to be told slowly, because it is the only long stretch of pure making in the whole epic. They cleared and they dug and they laid out streets before there were houses to put on them. They brought water in. They planted trees along roads that had no traffic yet, because somebody had the sense to know that trees take 30 years. They raised walls and set gates in the walls, and the gates were larger than they needed to be, because a city is partly an argument about the future. Craftsmen came because there was work. Traders came because there were craftsmen. Within a few years there was a white city standing in a place that had been thorn scrub, with a moat round it, and lamps along the streets, and gardens inside the walls, and they called it Indraprastha. Yudhishthira was crowned there. His brothers ran the parts of it they were suited to. Draupadi was its queen, and by every account it was well governed. And the years that followed were the best years any of them ever had, and were the last good years, and nobody living in them knew that, which is the ordinary condition of good years. And the new city put out its lamps, one by one, along streets that had been forest a year before, and the sound of it settling was the sound of something that would not last, though no one heard that yet. You will remember Indraprastha rising, where a forest had been, and how the 5 brothers had a kingdom of their own at last. Into that city, some years after it was finished, there came a builder named Maya, who owed the brothers a debt of the kind that cannot be paid in money, and who asked to be allowed to make them a hall. He was given the ground and the labor and left to it, and he took a long time about it, and what he made was one of the strange objects of the world. It was very large and very cool. That was the first thing anyone noticed on coming in out of the sun, that the air inside had been thought about. The floors were laid in stone so dark and so finely polished that they held the whole ceiling in them upside down, and a man walking across them seemed to be walking across the sky. There were pools set into those floors, level with the stone, and edged so exactly that the water and the stone met without a lip, and the water was so still that it also held the ceiling, and the two surfaces were indistinguishable except by putting a foot on them. There were doorways cut where the eye expected wall, and wall-paneled where the eye expected doorway. There were courtyards under the open sky in the middle of it that you came upon without warning, with trees in them and birds that had moved in and stayed. There were galleries where the light came from somewhere you could not identify. Maya had built the whole thing as a long, gentle joke about the difference between what is there and what is seen, and people came from everywhere to walk through it and be pleasantly wrong about the floor. And in that hall Yudhishthira held the great sacrifice, the Rajasuya, which a king performs when he is claiming to be first among kings, and which cannot be performed unless the others agree to come. His brothers went out to the 4 directions to see that they would. That is a whole cycle of its own. Arjuna north into the cold, Bhima east, Nakula west, Sahadeva south. And the story tells it at length elsewhere, and tonight simply notes that they went, and were gone a long while, and came back with tribute and with the agreement of kings. Then the sacrifice itself, which took days, the fires, the recitation, the arriving of guests, the enormous logistics of feeding a continent's aristocracy, all of it managed by brothers who had, not so many years before, been dividing 1 pot of alms between 6 people in a rented room in Ekachakra. Bhishma came, Drona came, Dhritarashtra came, and Gandhari, and all 100 of their sons. Krishna came, the Dark One, cousin and friend, who had been somewhere near this family since the beginning, without ever being at the center of it. At the giving of the first honor, Yudhishthira gave it to Krishna, and a king named Shishupala, who had a long grievance and a worse temper, stood up and objected, and went on objecting past the point where anyone could help him. The story deals with what happened next in a single sentence and looks away, which is what it does with that kind of thing. And the sacrifice continued, and the hall was full of light, and Yudhishthira was, from that week, the first king in the world. And Duryodhana walked through the hall. He had been walking through it for days by then, in a mood he could not put down. He had watched his cousins receive the homage of every house he had ever been taught to respect. He had watched tribute come in on carts for a week. He had watched the brother he had tried to burn to death sit calmly at the center of the world's good opinion. And he was walking through a beautiful, cool building, looking at all of it, when he came to a place where the floor was water, and stepped onto it, and went in. He was helped out. He was dried off. And a little further on he came to a place where the floor was stone, and lifted his robe to wade, and did not need to. And people laughed, not many, and not for long, and not, in most cases, unkindly. It was the laugh a room gives when a big man goes into a pond. But Draupadi laughed from a gallery, and he heard her. And some of his brothers laughed, and a servant laughed and could not stop. And Duryodhana stood in the middle of a floor that had made a fool of him, in a hall built by a man who worked for his cousins, at a ceremony celebrating that his cousins were greater than he was, and something in him closed. The story is sorry for him here. It does not say so. It simply goes quiet and follows him out. He went home. He did not speak for most of the journey. And somewhere on that road, his mother's brother, Shakuni, the uncle from the mountains, who was clever with dice and fond of his nephew in the particular way that ruins people, rode alongside him and began to talk. Shakuni's argument was gentle and entirely reasonable. War was out of the question. The brothers had the alliance of Panchala now, and half the kings of the world had just eaten at their table. And anyway, Bhishma and Drona would never permit it. But Yudhishthira had one weakness, a small and gentlemanly one, which was that he liked to play at dice, and could not stop when he was losing, and could not refuse a challenge, because refusing was not the sort of thing a king did. And Shakuni, as it happened, was very good with dice, not merely lucky, good. So it need not be war at all. It could be a game between cousins at a family gathering, with the elders present and everything perfectly correct. Duryodhana took the idea home and asked his father for it. And his father, who had been told by Vidura exactly what would happen, and who knew that Vidura was right, and who had never in his life been able to say the word no to this particular son, said yes, and had an invitation written, and sent Vidura himself to carry it, which was a small cruelty on top of a large one. Vidura rode to Indraprastha with an invitation he was ashamed of, and delivered it, and told Yudhishthira plainly what he thought of it, because he always did. And Yudhishthira said that he could see it too. And then he said that a king who is invited to his uncle's house does not send back word that he is afraid of the company, and that the thing would have to be gone through with, and that perhaps it would come to nothing. They went south a few days later, the 5 of them, and Draupadi with them, in the good clothes of a state visit. And the lamps of the Hall of Illusions were put out one by one, and the water lay still where it truly was and where it was not, and the night made no distinction between them. You will remember the invitation that came to Indraprastha, and how it was accepted, as such things are. The hall at Hastinapura was not the Hall of Illusions. It was older and heavier, and it smelled of stone and lamp oil, and of a great many state occasions. And it had been built by people who wanted a room in which nothing could be doubted. There were pillars down both sides. There were benches in tiers where the elders sat. At the far end there was the seat of the king, and in it sat Dhritarashtra, who could not see any of what followed, and had to be told about it as it happened, which is a thing worth remembering, because he is going to have to be told about something much worse in the same way much later on a terrace. Bhishma was there, the grandfather of both houses. Drona was there, the teacher of both houses. Vidura was there, and Kripa, and the 100 sons of Gandhari, and a good part of the court, and the whole thing was entirely correct and public and above board, which was the arrangement's one piece of genius. Very slow, soft, low, and even, with unhurried pauses at the end of every sentence. Keep the energy calm and soothing throughout. Read only the provided text. Do not add or improvise any extra words. The board was brought out and set on the floor, and Shakuni sat down on one side of it, and Yudhishthira on the other, and everybody else settled to watch a friendly game between cousins. He staked jewels first. That is how it goes, and the going of it is the whole chapter, so let it go slowly. He staked a string of pearls, and Shakuni threw, and Shakuni won. He staked a chest of gold, and Shakuni threw, and said the thing he said every time, which was simply this: "I have won," in a voice with no triumph in it at all, the flat, pleasant voice of a man reading out a result. He staked chariots, won. He staked the horses that drew them, matched teams that had taken years to breed, won. He staked elephants, and the men who kept them, and the grain that fed them, won. And the room, which had begun by watching a game, gradually stopped talking, and then stopped shifting, until there was nothing in that hall but 2 men and a board, and the small dry sound of dice going down on stone, over and over, at intervals, like a slow drip somewhere in a house at night. It is a horrible rhythm, and it is also, if you listen to it long enough, very nearly a lullaby. And both of those things are true at once, and neither cancels the other. He staked his herds and his lands. He staked the villages of his kingdom, one district at a time, and then all of them together. He staked the city itself, the white city they had built out of thorn scrub with their own hands, with its trees planted along roads for a future nobody had yet lived in. One. Vidura stood up somewhere in there and said, out loud, to the king, that this had gone far enough and should be stopped, and that the man throwing the dice was cheating, and that everyone in the room knew it. He was told to sit down. He said it again anyway. He was ignored, and he stayed standing for the rest of it, which was all he could do. Then Yudhishthira staked his brothers. Nakula 1. Sadeva 1. And then, because by that stage of such a night a man is no longer reasoning, Arjuna, the finest archer in the world, sitting a few feet away and saying nothing. 1. And Bhima, who could have picked up the board, and the man behind it, and the pillar behind him. 1. And Bhima sat still, because his elder brother had staked him, and in the world they lived in, that was that. And then Yudhishthira staked himself, and lost, and was a slave. And then Shakuni, in the same flat, pleasant voice, observed that there was one thing left. The story slows here, and so should we, because what happens next is the hinge of the whole epic, and it is not the part people usually think it is. Draupadi was sent for. She did not come. She sent back a question instead, and it was the sharpest thing said by anybody in that hall on that night, or any other. She asked whether her husband had lost himself first, or her. Because if he had staked himself and lost, then he was a slave when he staked her, and a slave owns nothing, and had nothing to stake. She wanted that answered before she came anywhere. It is a clean question, with an obvious answer, and not one man in that room would give it. Bhishma, who had kept a vow for 60 years, and had never in his life been unable to say what was right, said that the law was subtle, and that he could not determine it. Drona said nothing. Kripa said nothing. The king said nothing. 100 princes said nothing. And in that silence she was brought into the hall anyway, in one cloth, with her hair down, in front of the whole court. And Duryodhana's brother Dushasana laid hands on her in the sight of every elder she had ever been taught to honor. The story does not describe it, and neither will this telling. What it describes is the room. It describes men looking at the floor. It describes Vidura standing with nothing left to say. It describes Bhishma with his hands on his knees. It describes an old blind king being told what was happening by someone leaning down to his ear and saying nothing. That is where the shame lives in this story, not in the two men who did it, who were exactly what they had always been, but in the 20 who could have stopped it in one sentence and chose instead to discover that the law was complicated. And it is told in every version that the cloth did not end, that Dushasana pulled and there was more of it, and pulled and there was more, and went on until he could not any more, and sat down. The story gives that image once, plainly, and does not embroider it, and moves on, and so will we. Then there were vows. They were not shouted. Bhima said quietly what he would do about Dushasana and about Duryodhana, naming both, in the level voice of a man stating a delivery date, and it was more frightening than shouting would have been. Draupadi said that she would not bind her hair again until it was done. And the room heard it, and knew that all of that was now fixed in the world, and could not be talked out of existence, and would be paid for by everybody present. Dhritarashtra at last took fright. Old, blind, arriving far too late, as he always did, he called her over and asked her to name what she wanted undone. And she asked for her husband's freedom, and he gave it, and gave back the kingdom too. And for about an hour that night, it looked as though the whole thing might be a bad evening that a family could recover from. Very slow, soft, low, and even, with unhurried pauses at the end of every sentence. Keep the energy calm and soothing throughout. Read only the provided text. Do not add or improvise any extra words. They got as far as the road home before the messenger caught them and called them back for one last throw. One only. Nothing staked but a condition. The losers to go into the forest for 12 years, and to spend a 13th year somewhere among people, unrecognized. And if they were recognized in that 13th year, to do the whole of it again. Yudhishthira turned round and came back and sat down and threw, because he could not do otherwise, and lost. They left through the main gate at evening, the 5 of them and their queen, in the plain cloth they had changed into, walking, with the city standing along the walls to watch them go. Draupadi walked with her hair loose down her back, which she had said she would, and the people who saw it understood exactly what it meant, and the news of it went out across the country ahead of them, faster than they could walk. And the board was left on the floor of the hall where it had fallen, and the servants did not touch it, and the lamps burned down over it all night without anyone watching. You will remember how the 5 brothers and their queen walked out of Hastinapura at evening with 12 years of forest in front of them. The first thing to say about those 12 years is that almost nothing happened in them, and that this is the best part of the story, and that the epic itself seems to know it, because it spends more time here than anywhere else, and is in no hurry whatsoever. They went first to a forest called Kamyaka, on the edge of the desert country, and later to a place by a lake called Dvaita, and later still back again. And the names matter less than the shape of the days. They built with what was there. They had a hut, and then a better hut. They learned where the water was, and which of the trees came into fruit in which month, and where the deer went in the hot part of the afternoon, and all the other things that a place tells you if you stay in it long enough and have nothing else to do. A great many Brahmins had followed them out of the city, which was a considerable nuisance and a considerable honor. These were men who had eaten at Yudhishthira's table for years, and had decided, without much discussion, that they would rather be poor in a forest with him than comfortable in a city without him. He could not send them away, and could not feed them, and this was solved, as such things are solved in this story, by a gift, a vessel that gave food each day until the queen had eaten, and would then give no more until the next day. So Draupadi ate last, every day, for 12 years, and that is how 100 people were fed in a forest. And it is also, if you look at it directly, a fairly exact description of what it is to keep a household. The seasons went round. That is the substance of it. The hot months when the leaves went grey, and the water in the lake drew back from its edges, and everyone moved slowly and talked less. The rains, when the whole forest changed its noise, and the paths became rivers, and they sat under the roof for days at a time with the sound of water on thatch. The short, cool season, when the mornings had mist in them, and the fires were worth sitting close to. Then the hot months again. Then the rains again. And a listener who has lost count of which year it is by now is having exactly the experience the chapter is trying to give. 2 things happened in all that time that the story keeps, and they are both quiet. The first is that Arjuna went away alone. He went north on foot into the mountains to ask for weapons that would be needed later, though nobody said so out loud. He climbed a long way past where anyone lived. And there, on a mountain, he stood still and did nothing at all for a very long time, standing on one foot in the cold, eating less and less, and then nothing, until his body had become a thing that was simply present on that slope, like a stone or a tree. And when at last something came, it did not come grandly. It came as a hunter, an ordinary mountain man with a bow, who claimed that a boar the two of them had both shot at was his. They quarreled about it like men in a field. Then they fought about it, and Arjuna, who was the finest archer in the world, found that he could not win, and then that he could not draw, and then that he was on his knees in the snow with his hands empty. And when he looked up, the hunter was not a hunter, and had never been, and had come the whole way down a mountain in a pair of old sandals to see whether the best archer alive would fight over a pig like anybody else. What he was given there was the Pashupata, and the story is careful about what it says. It does not describe a flash or a noise. It describes a stillness, a thing that, once known, did not have to be used, and was never used in the war that followed, and sat in Arjuna's mind for the rest of his life like a room in a house he did not go into. That is all. He came back down the mountain some years later with it, and with other gifts from other places, and with the particular quiet of a man who has been alone above the tree line for a long time. The second thing is smaller, and is the one people remember. While Arjuna was away, Bhima went up a path one afternoon on some errand of his own, and found an old monkey lying across it, thin and gray, with its tail stretched out over the whole width of the track. Bhima told it to move. It said courteously that it was old and tired, and would rather not, and suggested that he step over it. Bhima said that he could not step over a living creature, which was true, and that the monkey should therefore shift its tail, which was reasonable. And the monkey said that he was welcome to move the tail himself. Bhima, who could uproot trees, and had killed things that other men would not look at, bent down and took hold of the tail, and pulled, and nothing happened. He put both hands to it. He put his back into it. He worked at that tail for a length of time that the story clearly enjoys. And in the end, he stood up, sweating, in front of an old monkey on a forest path, and understood that he had been beaten by something he could not measure, and knelt down and asked who it was. It was his own brother, in a manner of speaking, the son of the wind as he was, come to take some of the ferocity out of a man who was going to need less of it than he thought. They talked a while. Then Bhima went on up the path, and there was a little less of something in him afterwards that he was better without. And there was a lake near the end. Very slow, soft, low, and even, with unhurried pauses at the end of every sentence. Keep the energy calm and soothing throughout. Read only the provided text. Do not add or improvise any extra words. They were thirsty in the last year, in dry country, and the brothers went one by one to a pool to drink. And a voice from somewhere near the water asked each of them to answer questions first, and each of them drank anyway, and lay down beside it and did not get up. Yudhishthira came last, and found 4 brothers lying by the water in the failing light, and did not drink. He sat down and said he would answer. So there was a conversation at the edge of a lake at dusk, between a tired king and a voice, and the questions were not riddles. They were the plain ones. What is heavier than the earth? What is faster than the wind? What is the road? And at the end of them the voice asked what the greatest wonder in the world was. And Yudhishthira said that every day creatures go to their death, and everyone who is left behind sees it, and no one who sees it believes that it will happen to him, and that there is nothing more astonishing in the world than that. And the voice was satisfied, and said that he might have one brother back, and he asked for Nakula, not for Bhima, who was the strong one, not for Arjuna, who was the archer, but for Madri's son, so that both his father's wives would each have a living child. And the voice, which had asked its questions for exactly that reason, gave him all 4. They filled their water and went back, and the 12th year turned over, and there was a conversation one evening about where in the world 5 very recognizable men and one entirely unmistakable woman were going to spend a year without being recognized. And the forest closed over their year as water closes, without a mark, and the lake lay still under the last of the light. You will remember that 12 years had passed in the forest, and that 1 year remained, which had to be spent unrecognized. They chose the kingdom of Virata, which was small and northerly and quiet, ruled by an elderly king who liked cattle and dice and did not concern himself much with the affairs of great houses. It was the sort of place where nothing had happened for a long time, which was precisely the qualification. Outside the city there was a burial ground, and in it a tall tree, and into the top of that tree they put their weapons wrapped in cloth. Arjuna's great bow went up there, and the swords, and the rest of it. And because a bundle in a tree invites curiosity, they tied above it something that no one would climb past, and let it be known in the town that there was a body in the tree, according to an old family custom, and the tree was left alone for a year, as they had known it would be. It is a practical, slightly grim, entirely sensible piece of business, and it is over in a paragraph. Then they walked into the city one at a time, on different days, as strangers. Yudhishthira went first, as a Brahmin who was good company and knew the board games, and was taken into the king's household to play dice with him in the evenings, which he did for a year pleasantly, having lost a kingdom at it. Bhima went as a cook. He said he had been a wrestler and could turn his hand to the kitchen, and they gave him the kitchen, and he was extremely good at it, and spent the year enormous and cheerful among the pots. And the court wrestlers learned in due course not to take him up on anything. Nakula took the horses, because he understood them, and Sahadeva took the cattle, because he understood those, and both of them passed the year in the outbuildings without anyone looking at them twice, which was, as usual, their particular gift. And Arjuna, the finest archer in the world, who had stood on a mountain until the snow went over his feet, put on bangles, and grew out nothing, and cut off his hair, and went into the women's apartments of the palace as a teacher of dancing and music, under the name Brihanala. He taught the princess Uttara and her companions to dance all year, patiently, and by every account he taught them well, and the story does not once invite you to laugh at him, and neither should anybody else. It was the best disguise in the world for the man who could least afford to be recognized, and it worked because it was done properly. Draupadi went last, as a maid, a dresser of hair, and was taken into the service of the queen. And that is the year. A queen who had been the queen of the first city in the world spent it braiding another woman's hair by lamplight in a small warm room. Men who had ruled provinces spent it in kitchens and stables. They saw each other in corridors and did not stop. They passed messages in the ordinary business of a household. And after the enormous open years of the forest, everything narrowed down to rooms and doorways, and the particular slowness of time in a house where you are not anybody. There was one bad thing in it. The queen's brother, Kichaka, who commanded the army and was accustomed to getting what he wanted, would not leave Draupadi alone, and grew worse about it as the months went on, and there was no protection to be had from a king who was afraid of him. So it was dealt with, at night, quietly, by a cook. The story spends 4 lines on it, and does not describe anything, and the household in the morning understood that something had happened, and had the sense not to inquire. And the year went on. That is all that needs saying. Then, at the very end of it, within days of the end, close enough that it must have been meant. The kingdom of Virata was raided for its cattle. It was a small war of the ordinary kind, and it happened to be made by Hastinapura. And it happened to be made because Duryodhana had worked out, more or less correctly, where his cousins might be. The king and most of the army went out to the north to deal with one raid. And while they were gone, a second force came at the city from the south. And there was nobody left in the palace but women, servants, and the king's young son, Uttara. Uttara was about 17, and had been telling everyone for a year what he would do if he ever got the chance. He put on armor in front of the whole household, and announced that he would go out and drive them off single-handed, and then discovered that he had no charioteer, because every man who could drive was 40 miles north with his father. And the dancing master said, mildly, that he had held reins once or twice, and would drive him if that would help. Very slow, soft, low, and even, with unhurried pauses at the end of every sentence. Keep the energy calm and soothing throughout. Read only the provided text. Do not add or improvise any extra words. They went out together, a boy in bright armor and a person in bangles. And the boy saw the army drawn up in front of him, the whole of Hastinapura's chivalry, with Bhishma and Drona and Karna and Duryodhana in it, and got down off the chariot and ran. Which is exactly what any boy of 17 would do, and the story is decent about it. Brihanala caught him and brought him back, and sat him down, and said calmly that they were not going to run away, and that the boy would drive, and that he himself would do the rest. And they drove to the burial ground, and stopped under the tall tree, and the boy was told to climb up and bring down the bundle. There is a moment there when the cloth comes off. That is one of the small, perfect things in this story. A 17-year-old standing in a graveyard, holding a bow he has heard about all his life in songs, looking down at his sister's dancing teacher, and beginning very slowly to understand. What happened after was not much of a battle. The army of Hastinapura was faced by one man who had spent 13 years thinking about this afternoon, and it did not go well for them. And it did not need to be bloody to be decisive. They were held and turned, and the cattle came back. And Bhishma, on the other side, counted the days on his fingers, and observed to anybody listening that the 13th year had in fact been completed before this happened, and that whatever anyone tried to argue, the exile was over. They came back to the city, and the disguises were set down, and there was the sort of scene you would expect, with the old king apologizing to people who had been washing his horses. And a wedding was arranged, not for Arjuna, who had spent the year being that girl's teacher and would not hear of it, but for his son Abhimanyu. And Uttara was married to him in Virata's hall, with allies arriving from every direction for the occasion. And everyone in that hall knew what the gathering was really for. And that night the lamps in Virata's hall burned late over a wedding, and outside the rain came on softly over the fields, and no one spoke yet of what would come after. You will remember that the 13 years were finished, and that the 5 brothers asked at last for what had been theirs. They asked from a town called Upaplovya, on the edge of Virata's country, where the allies had been gathering since the wedding. And the asking went on for a long time, in the way of such things, by messengers riding south and messengers riding back, over a whole season, while both sides put their armies together and pretended that the messages were the important part. What is worth noticing is the direction the asking traveled. At the beginning, it was the whole kingdom, which was theirs by the terms that had been agreed in front of witnesses. Then it was the half of it they had built themselves out of thorn scrub. Then it was 5 villages, one for each brother, and they would want nothing else and would trouble no one. And at the very end, when it had gone past bargaining into something else, it was a house each, and the right to live quietly, and not to be kings at all. And the answer that came back to every one of those was the same answer. Then Krishna went himself. He went as an envoy, which meant that he went with no army, under the old protection that messengers had, which everyone agreed on and nobody entirely trusted. He went south in a chariot with a few attendants, and he traveled at night through the cool. And the story follows that journey at length, because it is the last quiet thing in the epic, and it knows it. The road went down through country that had been harvested. There were villages that had put their lamps out, and villages that had not. There were dogs that came out to the road and thought better of it. There were long stretches with nothing on either side but stubble fields going silver, and the sound of the wheels changing as the surface changed, and the horses settling into the particular unhurried rhythm they find in the middle of a night's driving. He stopped once at a poor man's house and ate there, which was noticed and remembered and talked about afterwards for 100 years, and went on before it was light. He came into Hastinapura in the morning, and the whole city came out to look at him, and he went into the great hall where the game of dice had been played, and stood in it, and said what he had come to say. He said it quietly, and he said it as an argument rather than a demand. He said that the 13 years had been kept to the day, and that Bhishma himself had confirmed it. He said that what was being asked for now was 5 villages, and that 5 villages was nothing, and that the alternative to 5 villages was a field with every fighting man in the world standing on it. He said that the cost of peace was small, and had been made smaller every month for a season, and that the cost of the other thing could not be counted by anyone in that room. And Bhishma said he was right, and Drona said he was right, and Vidura said he was right, and had been saying so for 30 years. And Gandhari was sent for, and came in with her eyes bound, and told her son plainly that he should take the terms. And Dhritarashtra, in the seat at the end of the hall, said nothing that bound anybody, because that was what he did. He agreed with the last person to speak, and then agreed with the next one. He wanted peace, in the way a man wants a thing he is not prepared to pay anything for. Duryodhana heard all of it out, and then he stood up and answered. And it is important that his answer is not stupid, because a story in which the war happens for stupid reasons is a smaller story than this one. He said that he had not been beaten. He said that no one had defeated him in the field, and that he was being asked to hand over half a kingdom because a family council had decided it would be tidier. He said that his cousins had lost their lands at a game. They had agreed to play, in front of witnesses, by rules they had accepted, and that the world could not run if things won fairly could be asked back afterwards by people who felt aggrieved. And then he said the sentence that everyone remembers, that he would not give up so much land as would fit under the point of a needle, not without a war. He believed it. That is the trouble. He had built a case and lived inside it for 13 years, and by then there was no door in it. So the embassy failed, and Krishna went out of the hall, and there was an attempt to lay hands on him before he could leave that came to nothing and shamed everybody, and he took his chariot back north in the afternoon without hurrying. But he stopped once on the way, at the river, because Kunti had asked him to carry a message, and there was one more thing to be tried. It was early, and the water was flat, and Karna was there at his morning prayers, as she had known he would be, standing waist-deep with the light coming up behind him. She waited on the bank until he was finished, and then she told him. She told him about a girl of 13 in a room in the afternoon, who had tried a set of words to see whether they were true. She told him about the basket, and the wax, and the river at first light, and about how she had walked back up the bank, and gone in to breakfast, and said nothing. She told him that the men he had been fighting against for his whole adult life were his brothers, and that the eldest of them was younger than he was, and that if he came over now, the war would end before it started, because Duryodhana without him would not stand for a week, and that he would be the eldest, and would have the kingdom and everything else besides. And Karna listened to the whole of it, standing in the river. And then he said, "No." He said it kindly, which is the worst of it. He said that she had had a long time to tell him, and had chosen this morning, and that he understood why, and did not blame her, and could not now do what she was asking. He said that he had been given a kingdom in an afternoon by a man who had asked nothing about his birth, in front of a whole city that had just finished laughing at him, and that he had eaten at that man's table for 13 years, and that a man does not leave a friend on the morning the friend is going to lose. He said that everyone would say he had gone over to the winning side, and would be right. And then he gave her the one thing he had. He promised her that at the end of it she would still have 5 sons, that he would fight only Arjuna, and would spare the other 4 whatever happened, and that either he or Arjuna would be alive at the end, and she would have 5 either way. And she went back up the bank, and that was the last conversation they ever had. After that, there was nothing but the gathering. The armies came onto the plain at Kurukshetra over the following days from every direction, and the story describes them the way it describes rivers, because at that size men move like water. Slow columns coming in from the passes and from the south road, joining, spreading out, finding their ground. 18 great divisions altogether, 11 on one side and 7 on the other, which is a way of saying more men than had ever been in one place. And on the last evening before anything happened, the plain was quiet. The tents were up in their lines with the lamps lit inside them, so that from a distance the whole thing glowed. The horses were picketed and fed. Men who would not be alive in 3 weeks sat outside and mended things and talked about ordinary matters. Somewhere a flute was going. The dust that had been raised all day settled slowly out of the air, the way it does when the wind drops at evening, and the sky went from yellow to green to the deep color it goes just before the first stars. And the plain of Kurukshetra lay under its lamps that night, like a city that had grown out of the ground in a single day, and would be gone as quickly. And the wind went over it, and did not stop. You will remember the 2 armies drawn up on the plain, and that the old blind king in Hastinapura could not see any of it. Before the first morning, Vyasa came to the palace, the arranger who set this story down. and offered his half-brother the thing he seemed he must want most. He offered to give Dhritarashtra sight for the length of the war, so that he could watch what his sons did and what was done to them. And the old king thought about it and said no. He said that he had been blind his whole life and had managed, and that he did not want the last thing he ever saw to be his 100 sons dying on a field. It is the one wholly good decision he makes in the entire story, and it comes far too late to matter. So Vyasa gave the sight to Sanjaya instead. Sanjaya was the king's charioteer and companion, a level, unremarkable, decent man who had been in that household for years. And what he was given was the ability to see everything that happened on that plain, at any distance, and to know what was said, and not to be harmed by any of it. And every evening, for 18 evenings, he came up onto the terrace above the courtyard, where the old king sat, and told him what the day had been. That is where the rest of this is told from, not from the field. From a flat roof in a city 60 miles away, in the dark, with one lamp, in the voice of a tired man speaking quietly to someone who cannot see him, about things that are already finished and cannot be changed by anybody listening. Every battle in this story arrives that way, at second hand, in the past tense, at night, after everyone concerned has already done what they were going to do. Hold on to that. It is the only way this part of the story can be told kindly. The first evening, Sanjaya described the morning. He described the 2 armies drawn up facing each other across a plain so wide that neither end of either line could see the other, and the banners standing up out of them, and the particular gray light before the sun clears the dust. He described the conches going, one, and then another, and then all of them at once, and then stopping, and the silence that came after being worse than the noise. He described the 2 old men on the far side, Bhishma at the head of one army and Drona near him, who had taught both sides everything they knew, and were now going to spend 3 weeks trying to kill their own students, because they had eaten a king's salt for 50 years and did not know how to stop. And then he described the chariot that came out into the middle and stopped. Arjuna had asked to be driven out between the 2 armies before it began, to look at what was in front of him. And his charioteer, who was Krishna, took him out there and stopped. And Arjuna stood up and looked down both lines. And what he saw was his family. He saw the grandfather who had carried him on his shoulders. He saw the teacher who had taught him to hold a bow, and his own cousins, 100 of them, whom he had grown up beside in one courtyard, and the fathers of his friends, and the sons of men he had eaten with. And he found that he could not do it. He sat down on the floor of the chariot in the middle of 2 armies, with his bow across his knees, and said that he would rather be killed where he sat than begin. And there, in the space between the 2 lines, with 300,000 men waiting on both sides and nobody moving, his friend talked to him. The story does not repeat what was said. It has been repeated everywhere else, and it is a whole book of its own. And tonight it is enough to say what it was: that for a long moment the entire world stopped, and 2 men had a conversation in the middle of it. And at the end of the conversation, one of them was still. Not persuaded, still. He stood up after a while and picked up his bow, and the day began. Very slow, soft, low, and even, with unhurried pauses at the end of every sentence. Keep the energy calm and soothing throughout. Read only the provided text. Do not add or improvise any extra words. The first 10 evenings on the terrace were Bhishma's. Sanjaya told them in the same even voice each night, and what he mostly told was weather. He said that the armies had gone into each other in the morning like 2 rivers meeting at a confluence, brown water and clear, and had turned about a single point all day. He said that the dust had come up by mid-morning until the sun was a coin, and men fought people they could not identify. He said that in the afternoon the dust settled where the ground was damp, and that you could tell from a distance where the day had been heaviest by looking at where the birds were. He did not describe wounds. The old king asked some nights, and Sanjaya told him who was living and who was not, and did not describe it. And it seems clear that this was a kindness he had decided on early and kept to. And the shape of those 10 days was always the same, because of the old man at the head of the line. Bhishma could not be beaten. He had been given his own hour to die in, on a riverbank, 60 years earlier, by a father who was grateful and did not know what he was doing, and no man on that field could take it from him. So each day he went out and did what he had sworn to do for a king he did not admire. And each night both armies counted what it had cost them, and the war did not move. He had said one thing, though, in the beginning, when he was asked how he could ever be brought down. He had said that he would not raise a weapon against a woman, nor against anyone who had once been one. And on the 10th day they put Shikhandi at the front of Arjuna's chariot. Shikandi had been born in Panchala and had lived a life the story tells in fragments, and had come into the world carrying, from a former life, the whole of Amba's grievance, the princess from long ago, whom Bhishma had carried off and then could not marry, and who had gone away and never let it go. That is the debt being paid on the 10th day. It has been waiting since the 2nd chapter of tonight's telling, and this is where it lands. Bhishma saw who was in front of him, and lowered his bow, and would not lift it again. And the arrows came, and went on coming, all that afternoon. He came down at last off the chariot, and the story says he did not touch the ground, that there were so many arrows in him and under him that he lay on them, above the earth, on a bed of arrows, on his back, looking up. And then something happened that is the reason this chapter exists. Very slow, soft, low, and even, with unhurried pauses at the end of every sentence. Keep the energy calm and soothing throughout. The fighting stopped, not by agreement, and nobody ordered it. Both armies simply stopped and put down what they were holding, and walked in from both sides together, and stood in a great ring around an old man lying on a bed of arrows in the middle of a battlefield. His grandsons on both sides, the kings, the drivers, the men who had been trying to kill each other an hour before, all of them standing there in the late light with the dust going down. He said his head was hanging back and asked for a pillow, and they brought cushions, and he smiled at that and said no, and asked Arjuna. And Arjuna, weeping, put 3 arrows into the ground under his head so that it was held. And Bhishma said that was right, and lay back on it. And then he told them that he would not go yet, that he had been given his own hour long ago by a father who loved him, and that he would use it, that he would wait on this field until the sun turned north again, some weeks away, and go then, and that in the meantime they had a war to finish, and should get on with it, and come and see him when they could. So they left him there, and went back to their lines, and the next morning it started again. And Sanjaya stopped speaking, and the room in Hastinapura was quiet, and far away on the plain the old man lay looking up at a sky he had been looking at for a very long time. You will remember Sanjaya on the terrace at Hastinapura, telling the old king each evening what the day had been. After the 10th day, the command passed to Drona, and the days that followed were his, and Sanjaya told them the way he told everything, from a flat roof at night, in a voice that did not rise. He said that the war had changed after the old man went down. He said it had got faster and less formal, and that the old courtesies were going out of it a little at a time, the way they do. He said that men who had begun the month saluting each other across the lines had stopped doing it. On one of those days, a boy went in. Abhimanyu was 16, Arjuna's son and Uttara's husband, married in Virata's hall a season before, with the rain coming down outside. On that day, the other side put out a formation that turned in on itself like a shell, and there were perhaps 4 men living who knew how to enter it, and only Arjuna knew how to come out again. And Arjuna had been drawn away to the far end of the field on purpose. The boy knew how to get in. He had heard it described once, before he was born, and had never been told the rest. He said so. He went in anyway because the army needed the whole opening, and the men who were meant to follow him in behind were held at the mouth of it, and it closed. He did not come out. That is what Sanjaya said, in about that many words. And then he stopped and described the evening instead. The light going, the birds coming over, the cooking fires starting up in both camps as they did every night, and the particular quiet of the quiet in the tent where Arjuna had been brought the news. The story does not go into that tent. It stands outside it, at a distance, in the dark, as it stood across a field from a burning house a long time ago. There was a vow the next morning about the man who had held the mouth of the formation shut, and the next day was spent keeping it, and it was kept at sunset with the light already going. In circumstances the story enjoys more than it should, and none of that is worth your sleep. Then Drona's own turn came, and it came by a lie. He could not be beaten while he had his bow, and he could not be persuaded to put it down. And he had one thing in the world that he cared about more than the war, which was his son Ashwathama. So there was an arrangement, and it was a squalid one, and everyone involved knew it. An elephant with that name was killed, and the word went round the field that Ashwathama was dead, and Drona would not believe it from anybody except the one man in either army who had never told a lie in his life. And Yudhishthira said it. He said the name, and then he said the word elephant afterwards, very quietly, so that it was true, and made sure it would not be heard. It was heard by nobody. Drona set down his bow in the middle of the field, and sat down on the floor of his chariot, and closed his eyes, and did not take it up again. He was an old man who had spent his life teaching other people's children and had ended up on the wrong side of all of them. And the story is not pleased with anyone about the way he went, least of all with the man who told the lie, who never entirely got over having told it. Then it was Karna's turn, and those were the days the whole story had been walking toward since a girl put a basket in a river. He fought Arjuna, as he had said he would, and he left the other 4 alone, as he had promised a woman on a riverbank. And nobody on that field knew who he was. That is the whole cruelty of it. It did not come out until afterwards, when it was of no use to anyone. And when it did come out, the man it would have saved had been dead for some days. The story lets that land and does not comment. Everything that had been built on not knowing, 13 years of a friendship, a kingdom given in an afternoon, a woman refusing a charioteer's son in a hall full of kings, a boy standing in a tournament ground with nothing to say when he was asked his father's name. All of it stood there in the open at once, on an afternoon when it was far too late to be of use to anybody. His chariot wheel went into the ground. It had been raining, or the ground was cut up, or it was the old curse coming due, depending on which telling you have. The wheel went in and stuck. He got down to lift it, and what happened then happened while he was standing on the ground with his hands on a wheel. And the story tells it in one line, and turns its face away, and the sun went down on it. He was the giver. He had never once in his life been asked for something and refused it, and had given away at various times and to various people who had come to him knowing his weakness, the armor he had been born in, and the promises that would have kept him alive. He was the eldest of the 5, and the only one who never knew it in time to be anything but alone. After that, there was one more thing, at night, in the dark, and the story does not linger there. What can be said is that a camp was lost in the night, after the fighting was done, by men who came in when they should not have, and that those who did it were never at peace afterwards, not for one day of the rest of their lives, and that this telling will not describe it, and does not think anyone should. And then it was the 18th day, and there was almost nobody left to fight it. Duryodhana went out to a lake at the end and rested in the water, which is the last quiet thing he ever did. They found him there. He came out because he was asked to, and there was a fight with clubs on the shore in the afternoon, and it went the way a vow made in a hall 13 years earlier had said it would go. And the eldest of 100 brothers, who had been the only one of them who mattered, was left lying on the shore of a lake with the evening coming on. He had time to speak. What he said was that he had ruled the earth, and had never bowed to anybody, and was dying on his own field with his friends gone ahead of him, and asked what more a man could want. It is not repentance. He does not repent. He goes out exactly as he came in, certain that he was right, and the story lets him, because it has never once pretended he was simple. And on the terrace at Hastinapura, Sanjaya came to the end of it. He said that the field was quiet. He said that of the 18 divisions that had come onto that plain 19 days before, there were a handful of men left standing, and that he could name them all, and that it would not take long. And he named them. The old king asked one question, which was about his sons, and Sanjaya answered it, and the answer was short. And Sanjaya set down the last of it, and neither of them spoke. And the lamp on the terrace burned steadily on into a night that was, at last, only a night. You will remember that when it was all over, the grandfather was still lying on the field, waiting for the sun to turn. The morning after the last day was very quiet. That is the thing every telling agrees on. The wind had dropped, and the dust that had hung over that plain for 19 days had finally come out of the air overnight, so that the light was clean for the first time since it started, and you could see all the way to the hills. And the women came out from the city. They came in carts and on foot, a great many of them. Out along the road they had watched the army go down, and they spread out over the plain in the early light, looking for people. The story goes with them for a little way, and then stops and describes the plain instead. The enormous flatness of it, the ground churned and dried into ridges, the birds, the horses standing loose in 2s and 3s where nobody had come for them. It describes the light on the hills. That is how it tells you what that field looked like, and it is enough, and it is the right way to do it. Gandhari walked out among it with her eyes still bound. She had bound them on her wedding morning, 60 years before, because her husband could not see, and she had kept it through everything, and she kept it now, walking over that ground on her women's arms, being told where she was. She had 100 sons on that field. She found where they were, one after another, and knelt down, and was told which one it was, and got up and went on to the next. And when Krishna came to her, she was as angry as it is possible for a human being to be, and said so, and said it to him, and laid on him the whole weight of what he might have prevented and had not, And he stood and took it. He did not argue with her, and the story does not argue with her either. It lets the angriest speech in the epic be made by a blindfolded old woman standing in a field, and does not answer it. And afterwards, in her own time, she put it down. Not because anyone talked her out of it. She simply came to the end of what grief could do and stopped carrying it, which is what actually happens to people, and she lived a long while after and was gentle to everyone. And it was in those days, on that field, among the offerings that are made for the dead, that Kunti went to her eldest son and asked that the rites be done for Karna as they are done for a brother. Yudhishthira asked her what she meant, and she told him, standing on the ground where it had all happened, some days too late for it to be of the slightest use to anybody, about a girl of 13 in a room in the afternoon, and a set of words tried out of curiosity, and a basket sealed with wax, and a river at first light. She told him that the man they had spent 18 days killing had been her son before any of them, and his brother, and the eldest of them all. He heard her out, and then he did a thing that is very like him, and very sad, and not forgiveness at all. He laid on all the women of the world the small, futile curse that they should never again be able to keep a secret. And then he went and did the rites himself, with his brothers standing behind him, for a man none of them had ever spoken to except across a field. Yudhishthira did not want the throne. He said, at some length and more than once, that he had bought a kingdom with his family, and did not want it, and would go into the forest and let somebody else have the thing. And his brothers, and Draupadi, and Vasya, and Krishna, and eventually Bhishma himself, all told him the same thing in different words, that a man who has caused a war does not get to make himself comfortable by refusing what it was fought over, and that a kingdom is a duty and not a prize, and that walking away from it would be the one genuinely selfish thing he had ever done. So he was crowned, without joy, in a half-empty hall in a city full of widows. And he did the work, and did it well, for a long time. But first they took him out to the field. Bhishma was still there. He had been lying on that bed of arrows through the whole of the rest of the war, and through the days after it, waiting for the sun to turn north, and would go on waiting for weeks yet. And it was decided, by people who understood what they were doing, that the new king should be brought to the old man and made to sit down and listen. So, for the whole of that winter, the court came out to a battlefield in the mornings, and sat on the ground in a ring around a very old man lying above the earth on arrows, and he talked to them about how to govern. He talked about it for a long time. The books that record it are enormous and are mostly not tonight's story. But the substance of what he said can be given in a few pieces, and they are the pieces worth keeping. He said that the first duty of a king is that the granaries are full, and that all the rest of statecraft is decoration on top of that. He said that a king should be slow with punishment, and that the slowness should be real and not theatrical, because a man who is quick to punish will in time be surrounded only by people who are good at not being caught. He said that a kingdom is not the palace and is not the army, that it is the smallest household in it, and that a king is the servant of that household and of nothing else.
He said a great deal about what is owed to people who cannot enforce what they are owed. And Yudhishthira, who had watched a hall full of the greatest men alive discover that the law was subtle at the exact moment it needed not to be, listened to that part with particular attention. And in between, the old man talked about other things, about rivers, and about his mother, and about the boy who had come down out of the mountains once with a bow. And the court sat on the winter ground and let him, because he was going, and everyone knew it, and there was no hurry about anything anymore. Then the sun turned north.
Very slow, soft, low, and even, with unhurried pauses at the end of every sentence. Keep the energy calm and soothing throughout. Read only the provided text. Do not add or improvise any extra words. They were all there for it. He said what he had to say to each of them, and it did not take long. And he thanked Arjuna for the pillow. And he let go of the thing he had been holding on to, since a father who loved him had given him a gift that turned out to be a very long errand. He had kept a vow made in the mud at a ferry crossing for the whole of his life, through everything, and had never once in all that time been released from it or thanked for it by anybody who understood what it cost, and he did not seem to mind. The story lets him finish. It is the gentlest death in the epic, and he had earned it. And after that, the years went by. There were 36 of them, and they were good. And there is almost nothing to say about them, which is the point. The rains came when they were supposed to. The roads were mended. The city filled up again slowly with people who had been born after the war and were bored of hearing about it. Yudhishthira ruled and was just and slept badly. Bhima ate. Arjuna taught his grandson to shoot. The twins did the work nobody noticed, as usual. Draupadi's hair was bound up again and stayed that way and went gray. And somewhere in the middle of those years, the old king Dhritarashtra and Gandhari with him, and Kunti, who had raised 5 sons and lost a 6th she never had, went out of the city into the forest to end their lives the old way, quietly, without ceremony. They went on foot. Word came back a long time later that they were gone, and how. And there was mourning, and it was the mourning of people who had done all their real grieving many years before. And the winter went out of the plain, and the grass came back over it, as grass does. And after a while there was nothing there to show for any of it but the river and the sky. You will remember that Yudhishthira ruled a long time, and that all the people who had made him do it were gone. There are signs in this story that a time is finished, and they are not announced. They are noticed. The rains came a little differently. The sea came further up the coast one year than anyone remembered it coming, and took a city that had been there, and did not give it back. Old men said that things were not as they had been, which old men say in every generation, and this time happened to be right. Word came from the west that Krishna had gone, quietly, in a forest, of a small accident of the ordinary kind, which is how the story chooses to end him, not in glory, and not on a field, but sitting under a tree with his foot up, mistaken for a deer by somebody who was very sorry afterwards. And Yudhishthira, who was by then very old, understood that it was time. So they gave the kingdom to Abhimanyu's son, the child born after the war to Uttara, the last of that line, who had grown up and would rule well and for a long time. And there was a proper handing over, done carefully over some weeks, with the accounts in order. And then the 5 of them and Draupadi took off their ornaments, and put on bark and cloth, and walked out of the city gate, and started north. There were no farewells. That is the right note, and the story finds it exactly. They did not make speeches or embrace anybody at the gate. They simply began walking, the way people do who have decided something privately, and are now only carrying it out. And the city let them go, and after a mile or two, the road was just a road. They went north and east, and then north, and kept going. Days of it, then weeks. The country changed under them the way it does. Fields, then rougher fields, then grazing, then nothing but grass, then stone. A dog attached itself to them somewhere early on, an ordinary dog of no particular breed, and trotted along at the back, and was not encouraged, and was not driven off, and stayed. The land went up. The air got thin and cold and very clear. They walked in a line, as they had walked out of a burning house across a field a lifetime before. Yudhishthira in front, and they did not talk much, because there was not much left to say, and because it was hard to breathe. And on that road they began to fall. Draupadi went first. She stopped and sat down and could not get up. And Bhima, who loved her, asked why, asked how it could be that she, of all of them, should be the first to fall. And Yudhishthira did not stop walking, and answered him over his shoulder in a few words, gently enough, about a fault she had had, and told him to come on. And they came on. Then Sahadeva, then Nakula, then Arjuna, the finest archer in the world, sat down in the snow and did not get up. And his brother gave a short answer about pride and kept walking. Then Bhima, last of the four, the strong one, the wind's son, who had carried all of them at different times, went down on the path, and asked, and was answered, and was left. The story is very stark here, and it is meant to be. Each of them gets a sentence. There is no argument, no last words, no scene. The road goes on up, and the man in front does not turn round, because he has understood something the others have not, which is that the way you walk up this particular mountain is that you do not stop for anything, and you do not look back at what you cannot carry. Except that he did stop once at the top for the dog. Very slow, soft, low, and even, with unhurried pauses at the end of every sentence. Keep the energy calm and soothing throughout. Read only the provided text. Do not add or improvise any extra words. There was a gate up there, or something that the story calls a gate, and light coming out of it, and a voice that welcomed him in, and told him that everything was finished now, and that he had come the whole way and could rest. And Yudhishthira said, "Thank you," and the dog comes too. And he was told that the dog could not, that there were rules about it, that dogs were not permitted in that place, that it was unclean and unthinkable and had never been done, and that he should leave the animal at the gate as anybody would, and come in and be at peace after a very long life of doing what was asked of him. And this man, who had gambled away a kingdom, and staked his brothers, and staked his wife, and told the one lie of his life on a battlefield to kill his own teacher, and had walked past the bodies of every person he loved on a mountain that morning without stopping, stood at the gate of everything he had ever been promised and said no. He said that the dog had come the whole way. He said that it had followed him when the others had not been able to, and had not asked for anything, and that abandoning something that had trusted him would be a worse thing than he had done in his whole life, and that if the price of going in was leaving it at the door, then he would not go in, and would stay outside with the dog, and that was all. And of course, the dog was not a dog. It had been walking beside him up the mountain all that time, being his own father in the oldest sense of the word, Dharma itself, the thing he had been named for, and had tried to serve since he was a boy, and had failed at spectacularly at least twice, and it was pleased with him. And the story, having spent 4 hours and 18 days of war and 100,000 verses examining what people owe each other, ends its hero's road by asking him one final question that has nothing to do with kingdoms or armies at all: whether he would be kind to something small that had no claim on him. He said yes, and that was the last of it. Very slow, soft, low, and even, with unhurried pauses at the end of every sentence. Keep the energy calm and soothing throughout. Read only the provided text. Do not add or improvise any extra words. There is more in the full telling, a further passage, and a hard vision, and a reunion. And tonight it is enough to say that he was not kept out, and that they were all there, and far away, and long before, in a forest called Naimisha, the fires had burned down to nothing much, and the night was nearly over. The sages were still sitting where they had sat at the beginning, some of them awake, and some of them not. And the bard came to the end of the story he had carried such a long way, and stopped. Nobody said anything for a while. Outside the clearing, the sky had gone the color it goes about an hour before it is properly light, and the first birds had started, one at a time, the way they do, testing it. And the story was over, and had been going on before he arrived, and would be going on after he left, because somebody would carry it somewhere else, and sit down by another fire, and begin again. There is a river, and on the bank of the river there is a city, and it would all happen again exactly as it had happened, which is the only kind of immortality anyone in it actually got. And in the forest of Naimisha, the fires had gone down to ash, and the first birds had begun, and the story was finished, and was not finished, and would be told again.